People love to say 1950s war movies were just patriotic propaganda. But here's the truth. Some of these films made Hollywood and the Pentagon deeply uncomfortable. One film was so un-American, a U.S. ambassador stormed out of its screening. Another was so accurate, veterans said it was the only escape movie that didn't feel like bullshit. And the best part? Most of these movies you've never even heard of. Let's fix that. When Attack premiered at the Venice Film Festival, a U.S. ambassador literally stormed out in protest. That's how controversial this was at the time. The movie pissed off so many people, the Pentagon straight up blacklisted it. They hated the script, called it anti-American, refused to loan out any tanks, uniforms, or soldiers. They wouldn't even let Robert Aldrich look at real combat footage. He ended up renting a couple tanks privately and used clever camera angles to pretend he had more. Set in Belgium during the Battle of the Bulge, it stars Jack Palance and Eddie Albert, both real World War II vets. Ironically, Eddie Albert, who plays a cowardly officer, was an actual decorated war hero in real life. During the Battle of Tarawa, Albert rescued over 70 wounded Marines under heavy fire, earning a Bronze Star for valor. But here he plays Captain Cooney, a coward who's only in charge because he's buddies with a colonel, played by Lee Marvin. Palance plays Lieutenant Costa, who leads a platoon that Cooney stupidly sends into danger, then abandons. Costa begs Cooney for reinforcements. Cooney won't budge. Eventually, Costa swears revenge, and the tension becomes almost unbearable. You've probably never heard of it, but at the time, The Enemy Below broke ground by humanizing both sides in World War II. Basically, it's about an American destroyer captain, Robert Mitchum, hunting a German U-boat commanded by Kurt Jürgens. Sounds straightforward, but it doesn't portray the German officer as some cliché villain. Kurt Jürgens himself said later this was the first post-war film he'd seen where a German officer wasn't treated as a total freak. And it's shot beautifully, too. No fake backdrops, real ships, real explosions, real depth charges going off right behind Robert Mitchum. One of the technical advisors was an actual former German U-boat sailor, Albert Beck, so even the submarine scenes feel authentic. The ending might feel a bit cheesy now, but the anti-war message still hits hard. This one's totally forgotten now, but in 1951 it was nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars. Set right at the end of the war, the U.S. Army starts recruiting German prisoners as spies behind enemy lines. The main character is an idealistic young German medic who volunteers to spy against his own country, even though Gestapo agents are everywhere, hunting traitors relentlessly. They filmed it in post-war Germany for authenticity, bombed out cities, real ruined buildings, actual war equipment. Watching it, audiences felt like they'd traveled back in time. Germans who'd actually lived through the war found it so realistic it was almost traumatizing. That's probably why nobody remembers it now. It didn't sugarcoat anything, it didn't wave the American flag, and that honesty probably costed its legacy. Unlike typical war films, this one's more espionage than explosions, and it's 100% true. It's based on Operation Mincemeat, a real-life British plot to trick the Nazis before the Allied invasion of Sicily. They dressed a dead body as a British officer carrying fake invasion plans and floated it ashore in Spain. The Germans fell for it completely, shifting their troops away from Sicily to Greece and Sardinia, exactly as planned. The officer who masterminded the real operation actually appears in a cameo here. His own 1953 book was adapted into this tightly paced thriller. No unnecessary side plots, just pure suspense. Gloria Graham's great in one of her best roles, and even though the British cast wasn't super famous, they're perfect here. It's old-fashioned, but still totally gripping. Doesn't get bloody or graphic, but it nails the spy stuff perfectly with all the deception and clever twists. Anthony Mann is usually known for his epic westerns, not war films. This was the only war movie he ever made. It's about a small unit of American soldiers trapped behind enemy lines during the Korean War, desperately trying to reach safety at Hill 465. Robert Ryan plays Lieutenant Benson, Aldo Ray is Montana, and from the start, they can't stand each other. It's a slow burn that builds to a really intense climax. Like Aldrich's Attack, it focuses just as much on internal conflicts among the soldiers as on the enemy itself. Mann uses sharp camera angles and creative editing to heighten the realism. It influenced tons of later films, especially Terrence Malick's The Thin Red Line. In fact, for decades, this movie was considered lost until finally being restored recently. Everyone remembers Christopher Nolan's Dunkirk, but a lot of people forget there was another big Dunkirk movie way before that, in 1958. And honestly, it's great, even if it's a totally different kind of film. You've got two separate stories here. First, a group of British soldiers led by Corporal Tubby Binns, played by John Mills, stranded behind enemy lines in France, desperately trying to reach the beach at Dunkirk for evacuation. At the same time, back home in Britain, you've got Bernard Lee playing Charles Foreman, a newspaper reporter trying hard to convince civilians just how serious things have gotten and why they should help out. This was a huge production. Producer Michael Balcon, who'd been around forever, said it was literally the biggest movie he'd ever worked on. And it totally paid off. It became the second highest grossing movie in the UK that year. 1958 gave us another big war drama with an absolutely powerhouse trio, Marlon Brando, Montgomery Clift, and Dean Martin. It follows three soldiers during World War II, each experiencing the war from totally different angles. Brando plays a German officer becoming increasingly disillusioned with the Nazi cause. Clift is a Jewish-American soldier fighting both Nazis abroad and anti-Semitism within the U.S. Army itself. And Dean Martin plays a nightclub singer who's been drafted against his will and forced into combat. The movie cuts back and forth between their separate experiences, eventually bringing everything together in the ruins of Germany. Now, here's the interesting part. Brando absolutely hated playing his character. He was pissed at 20th Century Fox because he thought they sanitized his Nazi character, making him overly sympathetic to avoid offending West Germany during Cold War politics. He even rewrote a ton of his own dialogue, only to have most of it cut by the studio. For Brando, this was the last straw. He vowed never again to let a studio tell him how to play a role. Before Samuel Fuller became a legendary director, he'd fought in World War II himself, so he knew combat firsthand. And you really see that authenticity in Fixed Bayonets, his early Korean War movie about a platoon of soldiers forced to stay behind during a dangerous retreat through the mountains, knowing their odds aren't good. It's basically this super tense survival story. Fuller shot the whole thing on a tight budget, less than $1 million, and mainly on a single soundstage covered in crushed marble to look like snow. Gene Evans, the guy who plays the sergeant, wasn't even an actor. Fuller picked him specifically because he'd actually been a soldier in World War II. Fuller insisted on realism here. His first cut had soldiers openly talking about cowardice, freezing to death, just straight-up fear, but the studio made him tone it down to pass Hollywood's production code. Still, veterans loved it. The Army even took clips from the movie to train soldiers, not combat training, but to prepare them psychologically for the realities of rear guard duty. Everybody's seen The Great Escape, but there was another, earlier movie about a real-life breakout from Stalag 3. The Wooden Horse told the true story of 3 British prisoners who came up with an ingenious escape plan. Every day, they carried out a wooden vaulting horse into the yard. One guy vaulted while others secretly dug a tunnel underneath. Americans just weren't into it. It barely cracked $150,000 in the US. American distributors even tried marketing it as a rollicking adventure, which backfired because the film is actually restrained, almost documentary-like. But veterans who actually lived through similar experiences consistently said it was probably the only escape film ever made that accurately portrayed just how monotonous and exhausting tunneling really was. Hollywood took a big gamble with this one. James Mason stars as Erwin Rommel, the famous German general who became involved in the plot to assassinate Hitler. This was one of the first American movies that dared to portray a Nazi sympathetically, basically showing Rommel as an honorable soldier trapped by circumstances he couldn't control. Studio execs at Fox were super worried about backlash, understandably, but American audiences, especially veterans, actually responded really positively, partly because Rommel had such a strong reputation as a tactical genius. In the UK, though, reactions were way different. British vets groups protested outside theaters, furious that the movie seemed to sanitize Rommel's reputation. It still managed to gross over $2 million, pretty solid for a war biopic of that era. It actually did so well in the States that Fox made a follow-up, The Desert Rats, 2 years later, this time focusing more on the Allied perspective. It was reportedly partly made to portray a less likable General Rommel after criticism that film had been too friendly to the Germans.